When the CEO of a multi-million-dollar retail empire hears rumors of bias and poor customer service in his own stores, he decides to go undercover. Disguised as an ordinary shopper, he walks into one of his locations expecting to see the values he built his company on. But instead, he witnesses something far worse: blatant discrimination, employees ignoring certain customers while catering to others, a culture that has completely strayed from his vision. What will he do to turn his store around? Watch to find out, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. The morning air was crisp, carrying the subtle scent of freshly brewed coffee from a cafe down the street. It was just after 10 a.m. on a Saturday, and the suburban shopping plaza in Atlanta, Georgia, was already alive with activity. Malcolm Carter sat in the driver's seat of his black sedan, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back at him wasn't the Malcolm Carter who regularly graced magazine covers or stood on the stage at corporate events. Gone were the tailored suits, the polished shoes, and the commanding presence of a multimillion-dollar CEO. Instead, he wore a gray hoodie, slightly worn at the edges, a pair of dark jeans, and a well-used canvas backpack slung over the passenger seat. A simple black baseball cap cast a slight shadow over his face, obscuring just enough of his features to make him blend in. Today he was just another customer. This wasn't a public relations stunt or an impulsive experiment. Malcolm had built urban living from the ground up with a simple vision: to create a retail experience that was welcoming and fair for everyone, regardless of race, background, or how much they spent. Over the years, his company had grown from a single storefront in his hometown of Birmingham to a nationwide chain, but growth came with distance. It had been years since he'd been on the floor of one of his stores as just a customer, and now whispers of discontent had begun to surface. There were reports, subtle, scattered, but troubling, of bias in service, employees neglecting certain customers while eagerly assisting others, and a lack of accountability in leadership. The numbers looked good on paper, but numbers didn't tell the whole story. Malcolm needed to see the truth for himself. Not as the CEO, but as the man who had once dreamed of a store where everyone was treated with the same level of respect. His destination was urban living, Atlanta Midtown, a location that held personal significance. It was one of the first stores he had opened outside his home state, a risk that had paid off handsomely. In the early days he had spent weeks there, training staff, talking to customers, and ensuring the culture he envisioned was taking root. But that was years ago. Now, standing in its parking lot, he wondered, had that vision endured, or had it faded beneath the weight of time and complacency? Taking a deep breath, Malcolm pulled his cap lower and stepped out of the car. The parking lot bustled with weekend shoppers, carts rattling against the pavement as families loaded purchases into their trunks. The urban living sign loomed ahead, its bold lettering a reminder of the empire he had built. Yet, for the first time in years, it felt unfamiliar. A business, no matter how large, was only as strong as the people within it. And today he would find out exactly what kind of people represented his name. He adjusted the strap of his backpack as he approached the glass doors, stepping into the cool embrace of the store's air conditioning. The moment he crossed the threshold, he became an observer. The store hummed with activity. Customers moved through the aisles, their baskets filling with home essentials, kitchen appliances, and electronics. The scent of fresh wood lingered in the furniture section to his left, while the distant beep of barcode scanners echoed from checkout lanes further down. Employees in blue urban living polos navigated through the aisles, stocking shelves, assisting customers, and ringing up sales. At first glance, everything seemed to be running smoothly. But Malcolm knew better than to judge by the surface. He lingered near a display of kitchen appliances, pretending to browse while his eyes subtly scanned the store. A young Latina employee, her name tag reading Maria Lopez, was assisting an elderly man near the cookware section. She smiled warmly, offering recommendations and taking the time to ensure he found what he needed. Just a few feet away, a white couple was being guided through furniture selections by another employee who was engaged and animated in his explanations. Malcolm nodded slightly. This was what the company was built on: attentive, customer-first service. But then, his gaze shifted toward the electronics section at the far end of the store. A young white employee, Ryan Parker, leaned lazily against the counter, his eyes glued to his phone. His body language radiated disinterest, his posture slouched, his fingers idly scrolling. Customers walked past, and yet, Not once did he lift his head to acknowledge them. This was the kind of employee that concerned Malcolm the most, not just indifferent, but disengaged. Deciding to test the waters, Malcolm made his way toward the electronics section, weaving through aisles at the slow pace of a casual shopper. He stopped in front of a display of Bluetooth speakers, picked up a box, and turned it over in his hands as if considering a purchase. He didn't expect immediate attention, but he expected something: a greeting, a glance, a basic acknowledgement. Instead, Ryan didn't even look up. Malcolm waited. A minute passed. Then another. Nothing. Finally, Malcolm cleared his throat and spoke, his voice calm and unassuming. "Hey, can I get some help with these speakers?" Ryan's fingers continued tapping his phone for a second longer before he let out a barely concealed sigh, as if the request was a personal inconvenience. He slowly lifted his head, his expression blank. "Yeah?" he asked, voice flat, devoid of enthusiasm. Malcolm held up the box. "Are these good for outdoor use?" Ryan barely glanced at the product. "I dunno. Probably." Malcolm paused, giving the young man a chance to elaborate, to show any level of engagement, but Ryan was already looking back at his phone. Malcolm exhaled, keeping his tone even. "Could you check? I just want to be sure before I buy them." Another sigh. This time heavily exaggerated, as if the act of flipping the box over was a monumental task. Ryan skimmed the back, barely reading before shoving it back toward Malcolm. "Says here they're weatherproof," he muttered, already turning his attention elsewhere. Malcolm felt his grip tighten slightly around the box. This wasn't just indifference. It was dismissiveness. Still, he gave Ryan another chance. "Okay, and do you know if they're compatible with most devices?" That's when it happened. Ryan rolled his eyes. Not just a subtle glance upward, but an overt, exaggerated eye roll, paired with a tone drenched in irritation. "Man, all the details are right there on the box. You can read it yourself." He gestured vaguely at the shelves. "Or pick something else. Doesn't matter to me." A beat of silence stretched between them, thick and telling. For the first time, Malcolm truly felt the weight of the moment. He wasn't just witnessing bad service, he was witnessing something deeper, something systemic. This wasn't just an employee having a bad day. This was an attitude that dismissed certain customers. Malcolm wasn't invisible. Ryan had seen him, acknowledged him, and then decided he wasn't worth his time. A few feet away, Malcolm noticed something else. That same white couple from earlier was now standing near the TV section. Ryan, who just moments ago had barely lifted his eyes from Malcolm, suddenly straightened his posture. He tucked his phone away, flashed a smile, and walked over to them, offering assistance without hesitation. No sighs, no eye rolls, just attentive service. And that's when Malcolm knew. This wasn't a fluke. It wasn't an oversight. It was a pattern. And he wasn't done yet. Malcolm placed the box of Bluetooth speakers back onto the shelf, his mind racing. The exchange with Ryan had been brief, but it told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a bad employee. This was a cultural problem. A problem that had been allowed to take root, unchecked, under his own name, his company, his vision. But he wasn't done yet. Taking a slow breath, he adjusted the strap of his backpack and stepped away from the electronics section, careful to keep his expression neutral. He wanted to see more, to observe how the store functioned outside of this one interaction. If this was an isolated case, he needed to be sure. If it wasn't, he needed to know just how deep the issue ran. Moving at an unhurried pace, Malcolm navigated toward the home goods section, weaving through aisles filled with cookware, linens, and decorative items. The store was busy, filled with the background hum of casual conversation, the occasional clang of shopping carts, and the distant beeping of registers scanning purchases. Then, just a few steps ahead, he saw something that made him pause. An older black woman, probably in her late 60s, stood near a set of shelves displaying dinnerware. She was dressed neatly, a simple floral blouse and a pair of slacks, her purse tucked securely under her arm. But what caught Malcolm's attention wasn't her appearance, it was the way she kept glancing around, searching. Her fingers hovered uncertainly over a boxed set of plates, her eyes flicking from the product to the empty space around her. She was looking for help. And no one was noticing. Malcolm stood back, watching. She waited. A few seconds. Then a full minute. An employee walked past a young white man, his name tag reading Jake, and she turned slightly toward him, clearly about to ask a question. But before she could, Jake's gaze slid right past her, his expression blank, his pace uninterrupted, as he strode past like she wasn't even there. Malcolm felt a familiar tightness form in his chest. Another moment passed before Maria Lopez, the young Latina employee he had noticed earlier, walked into the section, a clipboard tucked under her arm. She spotted the woman almost instantly, her expression shifting to warmth as she approached. "Hi, ma'am, can I help you find something?" Relief flooded the woman's features, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "Oh, yes, dear, I was wondering if this set comes in a different color?" she asked, her voice polite but tinged with the frustration of having to wait so long. Maria didn't hesitate. "Let me check for you. If it's not out here, I can see if we have it in the back." Malcolm watched as she pulled out a store-issued scanner, quickly typing in the product information. "It looks like we do have this in navy blue. I can grab one for you now if you'd like." The woman smiled, nodding. "That would be wonderful, thank you." Maria returned the smile before heading toward the stockroom. That was the service Malcolm had built this company on. And yet, it wasn't the standard. It was the exception. His grip tightened slightly around the strap of his backpack. Two different employees. Two completely different reactions. One had dismissed the woman without a second glance. The other had made her feel seen, valued, respected. It was stark. It was undeniable. And it mirrored exactly what he had just experienced with Ryan. This wasn't just an individual failure. It was systemic neglect. Malcolm exhaled slowly, forcing himself to keep moving. He wanted to see more. Needed to see more. As he made his way toward the front of the store, he passed a small lounge area near the customer service desk, a quiet corner meant for shoppers who needed a moment to sit or check their lists. Two employees stood there, leaning against a shelf, engaged in quiet conversation. Jake, the same one who had ignored the elderly woman, and another young white employee, Kevin. He wasn't close enough to hear what they were saying at first, but as he neared the aisle, their voices became clearer. "That guy over there," Jake muttered, barely moving his head as he jerked his chin in Malcolm's direction. "That he's just here to browse. People like that never buy anything big." Malcolm didn't react, didn't let his posture change. But inside, something sharp and cold settled in his chest. Kevin chuckled. "Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Probably just killing time, or looking for a discount." The casual ease of their words was what struck him the most. There was no hesitation, no concern that what they were saying might be offensive or wrong. They were comfortable, confident, like they had said things like this before. Like this was normal. And that realization hit Malcolm harder than anything else so far. Because this wasn't just about him. If these two employees could talk like this so openly, so unapologetically, it meant they had been allowed to. It meant that other customers had walked into this store, had been judged just as quickly, had been dismissed just as easily, and had left feeling the same unspoken message. You don't belong here. It wasn't always in the words. Sometimes it was in the looks. In the lack of service. In the assumption that someone wasn't worth the time. Malcolm could have walked over right then and there. Could have called them out, demanded an explanation, forced them to face him as the man who signed their paychecks. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he moved toward the checkout lanes, his heartbeat steady but his mind sharper than ever. At the registers, a black woman in her 40s was scanning items for a line of customers. Denise. Her name tag was clipped neatly onto her uniform, and Malcolm could tell, even from a few feet away, that she had been doing this job for years. She worked quickly but carefully, greeting each customer with a polite smile, her tone warm, professional. This was the kind of employee that kept stores running. The kind that made customers want to come back. As Malcolm reached her line, she gave him the same treatment she had given everyone before him. "Did you find everything okay today?" she asked, her voice genuine. Malcolm hesitated for only a fraction of a second. "Not exactly," he said, his tone even. "But I think I'll hold off for now." Denise's smile faltered just slightly, but she nodded. "Well, if you need anything, just let us know. We're here to help." And she meant it. As Malcolm stepped away from the register, heading toward the exit, he could feel the weight of what he had just experienced pressing down on him. The problem wasn't just bad employees. It wasn't even just bias. It was a culture that had allowed this to happen. And that culture, it had grown under his name. Malcolm pushed through the glass doors, stepping back into the afternoon heat. The world outside moved on as if nothing had happened, as if the last hour had been nothing more than another Saturday morning. But for Malcolm, everything had changed. This wasn't just one store. This was a wake-up call. And he knew exactly what he needed to do next. Malcolm sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel tighter than he realized. The heat of the afternoon sun pressed against the windshield, casting sharp reflections onto the dashboard, but he barely noticed. His mind was still inside that store, replaying every interaction, every glance, every moment that had peeled back the polished surface of urban living to reveal something far uglier beneath. He had come here expecting to find small cracks, a lapse in training, maybe a few employees who needed to be reminded of the company's values. But this was deeper. It wasn't just indifference. It wasn't just bad service. It was selective service. It was bias that had festered into something systemic. The way Ryan had dismissed him at the electronics counter. The way Jake had ignored the elderly black woman while assisting others. The way Kevin had laughed along, comfortable in the belief that no one important was listening. And that was the key, wasn't it? They didn't think anyone was listening. Which meant this had been happening for a long time. Malcolm exhaled sharply, running a hand over his jaw. He thought back to Denise, the cashier who had treated him with respect, who had treated every customer the same way, despite the culture that had clearly been allowed to fester around her. She had been the one bright spot, the proof that urban living could still be what he had envisioned. But she had been overshadowed by employees like Ryan, Jake, and Kevin. And then there was Maria. She had done exactly what he expected of his employees. She had seen the elderly woman, not just physically, but as a person who deserved respect and attention. But Maria wasn't in charge. Jake was. And the problem wasn't just that some employees were failing it, was that the right ones weren't in leadership. Malcolm knew this wasn't just an Atlanta problem. If this was happening here, it was happening elsewhere. And the worst part, it had happened under his name. He took a deep breath, reaching for the small leather notebook he always kept in his glove compartment. Flipping it open, he pulled a pen from his pocket and began writing. Not just thoughts, but a plan. This wasn't going to be just another corporate initiative. This was going to be a reckoning. But before he could fix the problem, he needed to confront it. And that started right now. Malcolm shut the notebook, tucking it into his pocket. Then, with quiet determination, he opened his car door and stepped back into the heat. This time he wasn't just a customer. This time he was the CEO. The store was just as busy as before when Malcolm walked back through the automatic doors, but this time he wasn't watching, he was looking. Employees moved through the aisles, some engaged, some indifferent. Customers browsed, some receiving help, some waiting for help that wasn't coming. He made his way toward the customer service desk, his presence drawing a few casual glances, but nothing more. No one recognized him yet. That was about to change. A middle-aged man stood behind the desk, his name tag reading David Russell, store manager. He was flipping through a stack of papers, distracted, his expression neutral but slightly tired. Malcolm stepped forward. "Excuse me. I'd like to speak to the store manager." David glanced up, polite but uninterested. "That's me. What can I help you with?" Malcolm extended a hand. "Malcolm Carter." David blinked, his expression flickering with confusion before recognition hit him like a freight train. His posture straightened immediately, his fingers fumbling slightly as he shook Malcolm's hand. "Mr. Carter," he stammered. I had no idea you were visiting today. If I'd known, I would have." Malcolm cut him off with a slight lift of his hand. "That's the point, David. You weren't supposed to know." David's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Sir, we need to talk, now." Malcolm's voice was calm, measured, but firm. David nodded quickly. "Of course. Let's go to my office." "No," Malcolm said, shaking his head. "Not in private. We're doing this with your staff. Get everyone to the break room. 15 minutes. I want every employee in this store there. David hesitated, clearly thrown off by the request. Sir, if there's an issue, I assure you I can handle. 15 minutes. David. David shut his mouth. He nodded. Yes, sir. And with that, Malcolm turned, heading toward the back of the store. He had spent the morning watching, listening, learning. Now it was time to speak. 15 minutes later, Malcolm stood at the front of the break room, facing a group of employees who clearly weren't sure what was about to happen. The room was small, lined with lockers and vending machines, the air filled with the scent of microwaved leftovers and stale coffee. Some employees stood, arms crossed, waiting. Others shifted uncomfortably, casting nervous glances at each other. Ryan was there. Jake and Kevin were there. So was Maria. So was Denise. And so was David, standing off to the side, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Malcolm took his time scanning the room, meeting eyes, letting the silence stretch just long enough for tension to settle. Then, finally, he spoke. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Malcolm Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of Urban Living, and today I came here undercover. The reaction was immediate. A ripple of whispers passed through the group, employees exchanging wide-eyed looks. Malcolm let them have their moment. Then, he continued. I didn't come to check the numbers. I didn't come to inspect the stockroom. I came to see how this store is run, how customers are treated, how you represent my name, and what I saw. His gaze landed on Ryan, on Jake, on Kevin. I was disappointed. A thick, heavy silence filled the room. Some of you, Malcolm went on, represent exactly what this company stands for. You treat customers with kindness. You do your jobs with professionalism. You make people feel welcome. His eyes flicked toward Maria. And some of you, his tone didn't rise, but it didn't need to. Some of you failed. Ryan's jaw tensed. Jake and Kevin shifted uncomfortably. Some of you dismissed customers based on how they looked. Some of you ignored people who needed help while making time for others. Some of you assumed a customer wasn't worth your time because of the color of his skin. The room was dead silent. That doesn't just go against company policy. That goes against me. That goes against everything I built this company for. And it ends today. His voice remained calm, measured, but absolute. Because let me make one thing very clear, this isn't just a store to me. This isn't just a business. This is my name, and I refuse to let my name stand for anything less than respect. Another beat of silence. Then, finally, Malcolm exhaled. Now, he said, his tone shifting, let's talk about how we fix this. And with that, the reckoning began. The weight of Malcolm's words lingered in the room, thick and heavy. No one moved. No one spoke. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound filling the silence. He could see it in their faces, the shock, the discomfort, the uncertainty. Some employees looked down at their feet, avoiding his gaze, while others exchanged nervous glances. Good, let them feel it. This moment wasn't about corporate pleasantries. It wasn't about sugarcoating the truth or skirting around the problem. This was a reckoning, and reckoning required discomfort. Malcolm let the silence stretch just long enough before he spoke again, his voice even but unyielding. I want to be clear about something. This is not just about today. This is not just about one or two bad experiences. What I saw in this store tells me that something bigger has been happening here, something that has been allowed to fester. And that means leadership. He cast a pointed glance at David, the store manager, hasn't been paying attention, or worse, has been ignoring it. David's face reddened slightly. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but Malcolm didn't give him the chance. Let me be perfectly honest with you. I built this company because I wanted to create something different. Something better. A place where every customer, whether they're spending $10 or $1,000, feels valued. A place where employees treat everyone with respect. But today I watched as certain customers were ignored. I watched as bias dictated who was worth serving and who wasn't. And I heard things that made it painfully clear that some of you think you can get away with treating people differently because of how they look. His gaze locked onto Jake and Kevin. Jake shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tightening into his arms where he had them crossed over his chest. Kevin dropped his eyes to the floor. Do either of you want to deny it? Silence. That's what I thought. Malcolm's eyes moved next to Ryan. He was standing stiffly near the back of the room, jaw tight, arms crossed, but his face was pale. He knew what was coming. Ryan, Malcolm said evenly, I asked you for help today. You looked me in the eye and dismissed me like I wasn't worth your time. And yet, just minutes later, I watched you turn around and give your full attention to a white couple looking at the exact same products. You didn't have a problem helping them, just me. Ryan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. Because he couldn't. Malcolm took a slow breath, his expression unreadable. He wasn't here to humiliate them. He was here to hold them accountable. This is not about one bad day. This is not about one mistake. This is about a pattern, a culture, and it stops now. Another beat of silence. Then Malcolm straightened his posture, his voice shifting from condemnation to command. Here's what's going to happen. The employees stiffened slightly, waiting. First effective immediately, Ryan, Jake, and Kevin, you are terminated. You no longer work for Urban Living. The reaction was immediate. Ryan's head snapped up, Jake's arms uncrossed. Kevin took a sharp breath. Wait, what? Ryan's voice cracked slightly, a mixture of disbelief and panic. You can't just. I can. And I just did, Malcolm cut him off, his voice unwavering. This company has no place for people who treat customers differently based on race. And if you don't understand why what you did was wrong, then you don't belong here. Jake's jaw tightened. You can't fire us just because you think we were rude. That's not fair. Malcolm let out a slow exhale, tilting his head slightly. Not fair. His tone was eerily calm. You know what's not fair, Jake. Walking into a store and being assumed to be a waste of time. Being treated as if your money isn't good enough, as if you don't belong. That's what's not fair. And that is exactly what you did today. So yes, I can fire you. And I am. Jake clenched his fists, but he didn't argue further. Because he knew. They all knew. David cleared his throat, shifting nervously. Mr. Carter, if I had known about. Malcolm turned to him sharply. That's the problem, David. You should have known. You're the manager. It's your job to know what kind of culture you're allowing in your store. Either you didn't know, which means you weren't paying attention, or you did know, and you let it continue. Either way, that's a failure of leadership. David's face flushed deep red, and for a moment he looked like he might argue. But then his shoulders sagged slightly, and he nodded. I understand, sir. Good, Malcolm said simply. Because I'm giving you a choice. You can either step up and fix this, or you can step down and make room for someone who will. David's throat worked as he swallowed. I want to fix it. Malcolm nodded once. Then listen carefully. Because the changes start now. He turned back to the rest of the employees. Second, every single one of you will be required to go through bias and customer service training. And this won't be some online module you can click through in 10 minutes. This will be in-person training, and it will be reinforced every single month. A few employees exchanged glances, but no one protested. Third, I will personally be making unannounced visits to my stores across the country. And when I do, I won't be walking in as your CEO. I'll be walking in as a customer. If I ever witness this kind of treatment again, if I see any customer being treated as less than T, the consequences will be swift. The message was clear. This wasn't just a warning. This was the new standard. Malcolm's gaze swept across the room one last time, landing on Denise and Maria. And finally, there are employees here who understand what urban living is supposed to be. Employees who already treat people with fairness and respect. He looked at Maria directly. Maria, as of today, I'm promoting you to assistant manager. Maria's eyes widened, shock flashing across her face. Sir, You deserve it, Malcolm said simply. You embody what this company is supposed to stand for, and I want people like you in leadership. Maria's throat bobbed, her hands gripping the hem of her uniform shirt like she was trying to ground herself. But then she straightened her posture, nodded firmly, and said, Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. Malcolm smiled slightly, then turned to Denise. Denise, I don't know how long you've been here, but I can tell you this: you're the kind of employee every company needs, and I see you. Thank you for setting the standard when others didn't. Denise smiled, her lips pressing together as if holding back emotion. Just trying to do my job right, sir. You are. And from now on, so will everyone else. With that, Malcolm took a step back, letting the moment settle over the room. This company has my name on it, and from this moment forward, that name will stand for respect. You can either be part of that change, or you can walk away. No one moved. No one spoke. And Malcolm knew the change had begun. The meeting ended with a weight that lingered in the air, a heavy silence settling over the employees as Malcolm stepped back. Some looked stunned, others contemplative, but none dared to challenge what had just happened. The gravity of the moment was undeniable. A shift had taken place. As the employees began to disperse, murmurs of conversation spread through the break room. Some whispered to each other in hushed tones, casting glances toward Malcolm. Others simply walked out, their expressions unreadable, unsure of what this meant for them moving forward. Change had arrived, swift and unrelenting, and they all knew there was no turning back. David, the store manager, remained standing near the door, his posture tense. He looked like a man who had just narrowly avoided losing everything. His face was still flushed from Malcolm's rebuke, but there was something else in his expression now: determination. Malcolm turned to him, his voice steady but unwavering. I meant what I said, David. If you want to fix this, I expect you to prove it. Not with words, but with actions. David nodded quickly, rubbing the back of his neck. Understood, sir. I know I let things slip through the cracks, but I won't let it happen again. See that you don't. Malcolm's tone wasn't angry, but it was firm. He didn't have patience for empty promises. Not anymore. David exhaled, glancing toward the door where the last of the employees were filing out. Where do we start? With accountability. Malcolm crossed his arms, watching as Maria, now an assistant manager, walked out of the break room, her back straighter than before. She's going to need your support. And you're going to need to learn from her. David hesitated for only a moment before nodding. I can do that. Malcolm studied him for a beat longer, then finally gave a slight nod of approval. Good. Then we move forward. With that, Malcolm turned, walking out of the break room and back onto the sales floor. As he moved through the store, he could already feel the difference. Employees who had once carried an air of indifference now seemed more aware, more engaged. Some avoided his gaze, clearly shaken from the meeting, but others, like Maria and Denise, seemed to carry a new sense of purpose. Near the home goods section, Malcolm spotted Maria speaking with another employee, her voice steady, her gestures confident. She was stepping into her role quickly, wasting no time in setting a new standard. He watched as she calmly corrected the way a younger worker was stocking shelves, explaining the importance of keeping the section neat and organized for customers. Maria caught sight of Malcolm watching her and gave him a nod, not one of gratitude, but of quiet understanding. He returned it. She didn't need to thank him. She had earned this. A few aisles down, Malcolm saw Denise at the register, her professionalism as unwavering as before. But this time, something was different. The other cashiers were watching her, learning from her. Whether they realized it or not, she had become the example. The bar had been raised, and they all knew they had to meet it. Good. As Malcolm walked past the electronics section, he noted the empty counter where Ryan had stood earlier. The space felt different now, like a stain had been scrubbed away. But he knew that firing a few employees wouldn't magically fix the problem. Culture didn't change overnight. But it did change. And it had started today. Malcolm finally stepped outside, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. He inhaled deeply, letting the fresh air clear his mind. He had done what he came here to do. But this wasn't the end. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his notebook, flipping it open to the page he had written on earlier. He pulled the pen from his jacket and underlined 3 words he had written before walking back into the store. Accountability. Training. Leadership. This wasn't going to stop with one store. He would take this to every location. Random visits. Unannounced evaluations. Leadership restructuring where needed. Immediate consequences for bias. Hands-on training, not just surface-level workshops. He wasn't going to let this be just another initiative that got forgotten after a few months. This was personal, and as he looked at the urban living sign above the store entrance, bold and familiar against the sky, he felt something shift inside him. This was his name, his company, his legacy, and from this moment forward it would stand for something real. Malcolm exhaled, slid his notebook back into his pocket, and walked to his car. He had worked to do, but, for the first time in a long time, he knew he was moving in the right direction. 1 month later, Malcolm stood in the parking lot of Urban Living, Atlanta Midtown, the same store where everything had come to a head. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue across the plaza, and for a moment he simply stood there, taking in the familiar sight. A month ago, he had walked through those doors as an invisible customer, a man searching for answers about his own company. He had left that day with a reality far harsher than he had expected. Bias, dismissiveness, a culture that had strayed dangerously far from the values he had built this company on. But today he wasn't here to catch failures. He was here to see progress. He adjusted the cuff of his blazer, no hoodie this time. He wasn't undercover today. He was himself. Stepping forward, he pushed open the glass doors and was immediately greeted by the familiar rush of cool air. But this time, something was different. The energy had shifted. The first thing he noticed was the employees. They were engaged, moving with purpose, actively assisting customers. There was no one lingering at counters staring at their phones. No one ignoring guests who clearly needed help. Instead, a young black employee in the electronics section was assisting a middle-aged white couple, explaining the features of a smart home system. In the home goods section, a white employee was chatting warmly with an elderly black man about the best cookware for baking. It wasn't perfect. There were still small lapses: a cashier who seemed hesitant when helping an impatient customer, an employee at the back moving a little too slowly, but the glaring divides, the deliberate neglect, they weren't there anymore. This was real progress. As Malcolm walked further into the store, David spotted him from across the floor. The store manager no longer carried the hesitant, beaten-down look of a man just trying to keep his job. Instead, he looked steady, focused, more in control. He approached quickly, offering a firm handshake. "Mr. Carter, good to see you again." Malcolm shook his hand, studying his expression. There was a sharpness in David's eyes that hadn't been there before. "How are things running?" Malcolm asked. David exhaled, glancing around the store. "Better, a lot better. You're sure?" David nodded, this time without hesitation. "We still have work to do, but I've been watching, listening. The employees know that this isn't just talk anymore. They know you mean it, and so do I." Malcolm let the words settle, then gave a small nod. He wasn't here for flattery, but he could see the difference for himself. "What about Maria?" A small smile tugged at the corner of David's lips. "She's in the back. Do you want me to call her out?" "No need," Malcolm said. "I'll find her myself." David nodded and stepped away, leaving Malcolm to weave through the aisles. When he reached the back of the store, he spotted Maria, clipboard in hand, speaking with a group of employees near the stockroom entrance. She looked at ease, confident, like she had always belonged in this role. She caught sight of Malcolm and excused herself, making her way toward him. "Mr. Carter," she greeted, her tone more professional now, but still warm. "Maria." He studied her for a moment. "How's it been?" She exhaled, nodding slightly, challenging, but good. "We've been making changes, holding each other accountable. Some of the employees who didn't want to adapt, they left. And the ones who stayed?" Maria's smile was small, but certain. "They're starting to get it. It's not perfect, but it's better." That was all Malcolm needed to hear. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small navy blue nameplate. He flipped it over and handed it to her. Maria took it, her brows furrowing as she read the inscription. "Maria Lopez, store manager." She looked up at him sharply. "Wait, what?" "You've earned it," Malcolm said simply. "David is being promoted to regional manager. He'll still be overseeing things here, but this store needs someone like you at the helm. Someone who understands what this company is supposed to be." Maria's lips parted slightly, her fingers tightening around the nameplate. She swallowed hard, her usual composure momentarily shaken. "I won't let you down," she finally said. Malcolm smiled. "I know you won't." She inhaled deeply, straightened her posture, then nodded. "Thank you, sir, for everything." "No, Maria," Malcolm corrected. "Thank you." As Malcolm made his way toward the exit, he stopped by the registers, where Denise was ringing up customers. When she saw him, she gave him the same polite, professional smile she had given him the last time. "Back again?" she teased. Malcolm chuckled. "Just checking in." Denise nodded approvingly. "Good. Keep them on their toes." Malcolm leaned slightly on the counter. "How's it been for you?" She pursed her lips thoughtfully. "Different. Better. Folks are paying more attention now. Not just to customers, but to each other. To how we treat people. Never thought I'd see it change this fast." "Well, you helped set the standard," Malcolm told her. "I noticed. And so did a lot of other people." Denise shook her head, chuckling softly. "Just doing my job." Malcolm nodded. "Exactly. And now, so is everyone else." With that, he stepped back, offering her a final nod before heading toward the exit. Outside, the air was warm, but the tension that had been there a month ago, the frustration, the disappointment was gone. This wasn't just about one store. This was about setting a precedent, a foundation. Malcolm pulled out his notebook one last time, flipping to the page he had marked on the day of his first visit. Accountability. Training. Leadership. He crossed out the words. Then, in their place, he wrote 3 new ones. Sustaining the standard. Because change wasn't a one-time event. It was a commitment. A movement. And Malcolm Carter had no intention of stopping now. He shut the notebook, pocketed it, and climbed into his car. This wasn't just his company. This was his legacy. And it was finally on the right path. Maria. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.